Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Theories in Action, the Senior Exchange. We're now in our 7th year. This is a conference that's sort of put on by the Dean of the College. It's changed in the past few years to be a more reflective space for seniors that intentionally thinks about the fact that this is sort of like a big kickoff to graduation, and it's a month away, and sadness and tears and all of that. But that's me, sorry. That's me ad-libbing, which I should stop doing. But I do want to say that the way Saturday works for Theories in Action is we had a lot of seniors apply, each with a distinctive project, a distinctive experience while they've been at Brown, and we had the honor of kind of sifting through applications, finding people that had similar themes or touched on similar ideas from a variety of perspectives, disciplines, projects. So we put together a group that's going to be talking about whose story, whose voice, the power, and importance of storytelling. So please, thank you, and listen to them.
Thanks.
We begin. Cool. We're going to introduce ourselves first, and then we're going to play a little game that will get us to tell tiny stories. I'm Anna. For the past 3 years, I've led the Brown Storytellers, which is Brown's first and only performance storytelling group. We actually just had a slam last night. Over 300 students and community members showed up, and so did Christina Paxson, which was crazy. She was standing in a bush. One big thing about storytellers is being very intentional about the stories that we share in clubs, but also in our performances. So that's something that's on my mind that I'd like to talk about today.
I'm Emma. I'm a senior concentrating in education studies, and I'm from Sheridan, Wyoming. And being from Wyoming is a really important part of my identity. And so I'm proud to be a Wyomingite here at Brown. What I'll be talking about today is a musical theater performing arts group that I founded in my hometown of Sheridan for middle schoolers and high schoolers. We do musical theater over the summer. I established it 2 years ago and have worked with about 24 middle schoolers and high schoolers in my hometown and have had a really great time and great learning experience from that, so I'm excited to share some of that with you.
Hey, good everyone. My name is Jonathan. I'm a senior double concentrating in history and ethnic studies. So throughout my time at Brown, I've done research in history, but particularly today I'll be talking about my senior capstone in ethnic studies, which sort of became a manifesto of sorts, and it's an examination of several different public humanities projects with the goal of getting a better understanding of how I can better bridge academia and public education as I enter a PhD program in the fall.
And I'm Eve, also a senior, double concentrating in education studies and linguistics, and today I'm going to be talking about my UTRA, where I had the opportunity to design a new course called Making Sense of the Difficult Past.
Great, okay, let's play a game. This game is called Check-In, and the way it's going to work is we'll go around the circle. You're going to knock on something. It can be your own body or a surface. You're going to say your name, and then you're going to just say something that happened to you in the past week. If nothing happened to you in the past week of note, you can expand it to 2 weeks. But keep it short. I will start. Check in. I'm Anna. My family's here, which has been super cool. They're staying at the Wyndham Grand, or the Wyndham Garden, which they told me is under construction. So my dad told me that it's not what was promised, but what was promised was a cheap hotel in Deer Point Park, so I'm not really sure what you were expecting. Check out.
Check in. My name is Natalie. I'm a senior concentrating in public health, and in the past week I finished with 2 classes.
Yeah.
Halfway done. Nice. Check.
Check in. Hi, I'm Tariq. I'm a senior concentrating in cognitive neuroscience. And last night I went to Delapo's last show, and that was fantastic. He is an amazing individual, so I'm really glad to have the opportunity to support him. Check out.
Check in. I'm Manuel Contreras, and I'm a senior here studying cognitive science, and this is my last big event of my time at Brown, which has been really fun. I think I counted, I've been a part of 10 conferences, so this is number 10.
Oh, God.
Number tired, too. Check out.
I'm Ryan. I just had a hug with someone that's still lingering. Feels really good. Sitting with that. Check out.
I'm Grace. I'm an 8th grader. Not really concentrating in much. And like won my soccer game. I don't really know.
Check in. I'm Anna's mom, Rebecca. Last 2 weeks, I ended up in Shanghai, but in a hospital unexpectedly with my 87-year-old mother. Thought she was going to die. She came back. She's just an never-ending buddy. What is that? Ever-ready buddy. So anyway, she's all good now.
Check in. I'm Paul, Anna's father, Rebecca's wife.
Rebecca's
Grace's
wife.
dad. Cisgender, I don't know what it is. And just had the opportunity this past weekend to be with my 3 daughters. I have another daughter up in Colby College in Maine who came down yesterday for the slam. So it's been fun. Check out.
Check in. My name is Ashna. I'm a senior. And last night I had my first all-you-can-eat Korean barbecue experience.
Nice.
It was a formative experience. Check out.
Check in. I'm Tori. I just visited one of my good friends at Tufts yesterday, which was really nice. And I just got back. So I'm excited to be here. Check out.
Check in. I'm Kayla. I'm a junior concentrating in public policy and anthropology. Last night, Neve and I went to a fundraiser gala, and then afterwards I wouldn't let her change before we went to the GCB. So we were the most formal looking people in the office. Check out. You're welcome.
Check in. I'm Priya. I concentrate in classics and computer science. And on Wednesday at Wisco, I got into a physical, tearful altercation with a bouncer. Check out.
Check in. My name's Adele. I study visual arts and a BEO. My grandfather was in the hospital, deathly ill, and made a pretty good recovery. And we're talking about longer-term plans instead of year-old plans. So that's what he's doing. Check out.
Check in. I'm Neve still. I this morning got up at 7:30 because I had to teach a 3-hour Kaplan SAT class, and my students are taking the SAT next Saturday, and I think they're going to do really well. Check it out.
Check in. My name is Jonathan. I also went to a dub show last night, and afterwards just stayed up watching some Netflix with some friends, which was really fun. Check out.
Great. Before I check in, can we expand the circle a little bit and get everyone in? Great. Thanks. Check in. I'm Emma. Last night I briefly went to the public art night, which was another part of Theories in Action, and it's all about kind of looking back at your time at Brown. And as soon as I got there, I realized that I am not ready to look back at my time at Brown yet and be nostalgic. And so I was just like, I can't engage with this quite yet. But they had a lot of food, so I got a lot of cheese on a plate, and I took my cheese home and kind of ate my cheese and thought about how I'm not ready to be nostalgic yet. Check out.
Sweet. Do y'all want to check in? So it's just you knock on something and you say something about your last week.
Cool. Great. Check in. I watched Emma eat all that cheese. And I'm not a senior, but it made me a little sad. Like, not about the cheese, but just the fact that it's all coming to an end so quickly. Yeah. Does it check out? Is that
Yep.
Perfect. Cool.
Check in. I'm Soham. I'm a sophomore. I semi-finished some of my art installations. So.
Oh.
Hey, cool.
Yay.
Great, thank you.
Yay. That's great. Cool. So that is a fun exercise we do in the beginning of storytellers meetings, but I also think that it speaks very much to how we narrativize and can narrativize anything that happens to us. And I think that speaks to the broader point that everyone has a story. It just takes the willingness to share and the willingness to listen to create a space in which stories can have real impact, I think. And with that.
Today we're going to be talking a lot about voice and whose stories are heard, and that's another thing that we wanted to kind of emphasize with this check-in, is that we want everyone in this room to feel like their voice is valued and heard, and that we are listening to you, and that everyone has those stories to share. So part of Theories in Action, as Manny kind of introduced, is that each of us applied for this independently with work that we have done over the past 4 years. And the Theories in Action team looked at patterns in those applications and grouped people together based on patterns that they saw. So we were grouped together, and it was up to us to kind of come up with a common thread and think like, okay, why were we put together, and what can we do to make our presentation cohesive and find those common themes between our work.
Oh, that's me. So I think the common theme here is storytelling. So whether it's performative, like what Anna and Emma are going to talk about, or whether it's stories in terms of what is told in our history textbooks, or in what we're teaching our children about the past and the present, whose stories are being told, and what should we maybe do to enhance and increase whose stories are told. And so that is what we're hoping to discuss today. We're hoping to impart some of our wisdom and learn from y'all, and think we should have a good conversation today.
Good.
Yeah. Oh, do I have to tap it?
Do we want to go to the question? Because I know we were originally going to introduce ourselves.
Yes. Oh.
Or do
No, I think we can go to the next slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I feel like I said a little much in the beginning when I was supposed to say not a lot. Storytellers. I joined my first year. It was a 2-year-old club at that point. When I walked into the room at the beginning, there were 4 white men and then myself. And I sat down and I listened mostly. And then after a couple meetings, I worked up the courage to share a story. I performed in the slam, and since then I performed in 5 slams, this one being my 5th and last, this one happening this weekend. It has defined my time at Brown, this club, and like things I think that are like passion projects. I have a fraught and beautiful and frustrating relationship with it. It's a club that has a tagline, and the tagline is 100% true stories told live from the heart. 100% true is a little bit of, these are like 99% true stories, because I think that in performance storytelling, it's narrativizing one's experiences, but it's also in some sense, and I see connections between ours, like it takes some aspects of theater, of acting, but we do try to stay away from more performative tropes, and keep it really real and raw when we have our slams, which is what we call our shows. So these are some of the posters that we've made. Over the years, we've made it a big initiative to increase audience size, to make sure that this platform that we're creating is reaching as many people as possible. So we do a lot of Facebook posting, and it seems to work. Our performances have pretty big audiences, which is cool. But in recent years, we've been looking out into the audience and seeing who comes to our performances. And the audience itself is quite homogenous most of the time. And then looking at our storytellers as well, it's been a difficult process, one that's absolutely still in the nascent stages of making sure that our storytellers reflect the vibrancy of Brown's undergraduate population, which very often is a struggle. So thinking really intentionally moving forward for the club leaders who will ascend next year, how to make sure that the storytellers are not all coming from a similar background, something that we think about a lot, and it's pretty difficult to think about and to affect change in that way. That's me.
So as I said, I started a group 2 years ago. It's called Funny Face Productions. It's in Sheridan, Wyoming, and we do musical theater performances over the summer with 11 to 17-year-olds. So I posted, oh well, it's just water. I put some pictures of previous casts up here. These are some of my favorite people in the world to work with. They're really lovely, lovely human beings. A really important part about Funny Face is not only the performance itself, but the communities that we build within the team. So I'm going to read a bit of our mission statement. In addition to excellent performance, our fundamental goal is to cultivate a strong sense of community, trust, and friendship within the Funny Face team. We believe that by fostering these community values, we improve both the quality of the show and the quality of every individual's Funny Face experience. So we spend almost as much time doing those team building activities and doing those trust building activities as we do actually, blocking the show, choreographing the show, practicing music. We perform in our town's community theater. It's called the YO Theater. And our performances have been so well received, and I'm really proud of that. Our first run of shows sold out before we opened, and we ended up having to do an encore performance a few months later and sold another 300 tickets, and it was just this wonderful show of support from our community. These kids are all from the Sheridan area. Something that I have dealt with a little bit or thought about a lot is Sheridan is a very racially homogenous town. It's about 94% white. And so as a result, our casts are racially homogenous as well. And so just thinking about how we talk about diversity in places that aren't diverse, and how I can responsibly do that with this group of relatively impressionable youth. Another thing that's important to me is that it's accessible for everyone, so there are no fees for being a part of the group. Similar programs elsewhere in the country might charge $300 or $400 for similar experiences, and I just thought that would be too prohibitive for too many people. So this is free. It's not something that I do to make money. It's something that I do because it's important to me, and it was actually kind of born out of this weird perfect storm of things. The first summer I did it, I had plans to be abroad that summer, and I realized that I really needed some time at home to kind of revitalize myself. And so as a result, I was like, well, if I'm going to be home, I need to be doing something. What do I want to do? What do I enjoy doing? And Funny Face was born out of that. So this summer, we'll be performing our third show together. And I'm in the process of receiving audition videos from kids, and that's just so fun and exciting for me. And I'm looking forward to chatting more about it today.
So as I mentioned a little bit, I'm a history major, so I've done history research throughout my undergraduate years at Brown. But for most of that time, it was very much looking at history through an academic lens, and it wasn't really until this year that I had the opportunity, through working with Professor Monica Martinez in the American Studies department, to get more engaged with public humanities. Which I think at Brown, even though we have like the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities, I feel like it's very much disconnected from our undergraduates. It's mostly for grad students, and there's like really great work being done there in making sure that this academic historical work we do on campus gets disseminated into the public. And so I took a course with her this past semester called Race and Remembering, in which as a class we created a digital exhibition on the history of the Mexican-American border, and so that was sort of my first foray into the subject, so to speak. And then over winter break, I had the opportunity to work with her and her Refusing to Forget team, which is a group of 5 to 6 history professors across the nation who all do similar work on early 20th century Mexican-American history in Texas. And so they've been working for several years at this point, I think for like 5 years. And after a lot of really hard work and just working with museums and other like academic figures in Texas, they opened up an exhibition over winter break at the Texas State Bulick Museum, which is like the major state museum in Texas, in which they had an exhibition on forgotten histories of anti-Mexican violence in early 20th century. And so it was really through this work with her that I sort of started wondering more and more what academics can do to make sure that their work is not just sitting in the rock somewhere or some other library, and making sure that it's being read by students and it's being taught. And so through my capstone in ethnic studies, that's what I've been trying to do. So some of these images are like things that I'm analyzing. Chicana por mi Raza is an initiative by Dr. Maria Eugenia Cotera, in which she has an online archive of Chicana historical documents. The bottom, Latinas in History, is a collaboration between Dr. Vicky Ruiz and a few other professors in that they created a CD-ROM and online site that sort of profiles some major Latina women in history. And Corazon de Dixie is a book that was written by Dr. Julie M. Wise, and she created a companion website to the book in which there's a sort of curriculum developed for public school educators to use to teach their students the topic. And so through this work, I'm trying to get a better sense of what academics have done in the past and get a better idea of what some of the difficulties they may have faced or some of the things they did wrong. Like for example, with the online site, it's really, really old. A bunch of links don't work. It's like kind of really weird looking at this point because it was made in like the early 2000s. While things like the curriculum that Dr. Wise created, this book was published in 2015, so it's very recent, and it has a lot of really, really useful things that can be done or can be utilized by public educators. And so I really hope that this project sort of serves as a stepping stone as I start a PhD program, and so that I can make sure that the work I create, even if it's giving voice to people people's histories who haven't been published, it doesn't just sort of stay siloed away in a library, and it actually gets to students like me who was a kid growing up in Texas but never learned any history about Mexicans in Texas.
And on a related note, so I forgot to put pictures, I apologize, but my project is called Making Sense of the Difficult Past. So this semester I had an UTRA and I worked with Dr. Magdalena Gross in the education department. She's the head of the History and Social Studies Masters of Arts and Teaching program. And so what we wanted to do is think about the intersection of history, memory, and education. So it's not a historical analysis, but rather thinking about how young people, given their curricula and given just artifacts like movies and plays and museums, are making sense of the history that is being constructed by their society. And we focused particularly on traumatic events in history because these are often the ones that are the hardest to talk about and sometimes given the least justice in our textbooks. And so it's 3 case studies. We studied Poland and the Holocaust, Northern Ireland and the Troubles, and then we covered slavery, particularly in the North in the United States. And so our hope was that students would begin to understand how these are represented in history textbooks across the world, maybe theorize about how we could better present these topics to our students, and think about why it's important to study history and study history effectively. And that's what I hope to talk about today.
So we'd like this roundtable discussion to be an interactive discussion, so we're hoping that we can get y'all to chime in. So our first kind of opening framing question is, what is a story? How do we define what a story is? So if we could take a few minutes and just like chat with your neighbors, and then we'll bring it back to the big group and kind of get a working definition. Don't be shy.
I guess I like to think of a story as kind of like a perspective, or like a person, or maybe a group of people's perspective. And just like, and that's like my idea of story, like the big broadest.
It's a beautiful day.
Yeah, I know.
Anyways, like we could have used this title or like sort of
I need to bring in like hundreds of words.
Depending on your experience and depending on the person you follow.
No, I just kind of piggyback off of my because like apparently my classes I've learned that a lot of it's like middle really like that. Just kind of like sometimes so like science ball like that, but like about it, especially people's perspectives or like students definitely follow that.
After my first year. No way.
And that was called Breakthrough.
Breakthrough, it's breakthrough, yeah, but it's still some of it's breakthrough. This one is it is. It's breakthrough. It's breakthrough New York as well. I think that's like really know what's like.
I think that's mostly
Like a story.
Most of the
I know some of them are just very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Some of them are just
because the one I did, when I did it was Super Bridge, but now it's Breakthrough.
yeah.
Really reflect the story. It's really strange.
All
how,
right,
like, they're
so let's come back together. Let's hear your thoughts on what is a story.
Do you want to say what you think a story is, my own mother?
Me?
Yeah.
We came up with a very, we came up with a list which is just a bunch of opposites. It's like it could be true, it could be untrue, it could be written, it could be unwritten, it could be, you know,
You said it could be biased.
and then we started to think, can a story ever be unbiased if you're seeing it through your experiences? So, just a bunch of this or that or this.
Nice. Other people?
We talked a lot about perspective and in a lot of ways about time and thinking about how stories seem to rely on a look backwards rather than like the experience of actually going through it. Yeah.
Cool.
Anybody else dying to participate?
We were talking about how a story is a series of events with a purpose.
Narrated with a purpose.
Narrated with a purpose.
I feel like that's like a very general definition that encompasses truth and non-truth. That's perfect.
And
Yeah.
you want to tell us what a story is?
For sure, yeah. I've spent a lot of Brown thinking about what a story is, especially in a pretty basic sense in an audition context. When people audition for slams, they'll bring in stories, and it's a difficult and a super fraught process to sift and to evaluate stories based on like a rubric that we're kind of making up. And so this is a cop-out answer, but I would argue that I'm consistently trying to figure out what a story is, and I don't know what it is, and I don't think that there are any criteria that adequately encompass what a story can be as well. I think that for me a story is an experience of listening, which is again super broad, but I think that, you know, I do work with The Moth, which is a storytelling nonprofit. They have a pretty rigid set of guidelines on what a story is. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's told from a first-person perspective. It's 10 minutes or less, which are like guidelines that I do not vibe with. And I think that for me, storytelling is a process of like very personal communication and sharing as opposed to some sort of definable product. Cool.
Okay, so moving on, we'd like to talk about how and why we tell stories. And theater is all about storytelling, but not only is it about telling the story, it's about actually transporting people to the story. And in order to do that, it's necessary for the actors themselves to transport themselves by fully buying into the story and giving themselves over to the text, the characters, the context. And it's also the hope that we can get the audiences to buy in enough to the story that they too are transported. So in a way, in terms of theater, stories are a way of remembering across time, across cultures, across space, because most of the time the people in the room, the people in the theater, they didn't live that story, right? We want to take them there and we want them to feel as if they've lived it, feel as if they're seeing it for the first time, as if they're there. And so how we do that is, it's hard because it requires such a level of trust between the actors and between the audience and the actors. It's this kind of an unwritten contract that people buy into when they step into the theater. It's like, okay, I'm going to let you bring me somewhere else, and I'm going to let you take me there. And the actors have to trust that the audience will be receptive and that they will buy into it, and so then the actors don't feel silly, like trying and attempting to get into this world, but like kind of bouncing up against that wall. And so it's hard. It's something that, especially working with adolescents as I do, sometimes these kids are at points in their life where they're maybe not very comfortable with themselves. And so sometimes that means that they're even more comfortable stepping into someone else's role, or sometimes that means they find it hard to step into someone else's role, because if they don't even really know where they stand, it's hard for them to find where other people can stand. But I think it's a really useful tool to be able to see through the eyes of someone else, and that kind of leads into something that we're going to talk about later, so I don't want to get into it too much right now. But yeah, I really like to think of theater as a way of remembering in the biggest sense possible, remembering and sharing that memory.
What shows have you done with kids?
The first show I did was called 13, and it was on Broadway. It's actually the only Broadway show ever written to be performed by a cast that's entirely made up of kids, and also a band made up of kids. And it's about this 13-year-old Jewish boy who's trying to navigate his identity. He's from New York, but he's forced to move into the middle of nowhere, Iowa, and just like navigating his school, his life, his religion. And that was really cool because these kids who have always been expected to play adults in shows were able to play people their own age. And so they were really able to explore aspects of those identities. The show I did last year, and that was the one that we did another production of a few months later. So we did a summer run and then a winter encore production on a larger stage. And then last year we did a show called the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, which is such a fun show. I highly recommend you look into it. And it's about a spelling bee and this really eclectic group of elementary and middle school spelling champs who are trying to like spell their way to the top. But meanwhile, as the show goes along through a series of flashbacks and stuff, you're kind of learning about these characters and where they come from and why they're spelling and what motivates them. And then there are the characters of the adult, like auditors, not auditors, what am I thinking? Like the hosts of the judges, yeah, it's auditor, whatever. And in my cast, they were also played by kids, so we had kids playing kids and kids playing adults. And that was a lot of fun. This summer we're doing a show called Lucky Stiff, where the roles are mostly supposed to be like in their 20s or early 30s, so that'll be a new challenge. The past 2 years I had some returners and some new people in the cast, and this year I'm hoping to strike a good balance there too. So some of these kids maybe have never played a role that's their own age anyways, and so this will be normal, but some of them, this will be a new thing, not playing someone close to their own age.
Yeah, no, I think you brought up like a really good point in that stories can be a lot of different things. So just in like how she was explaining how stories are used in theater, I think one of the ways also stories are used for survival, you know, like we were talking about how they can be written or passed down orally. So in like the work I've done, I've found that a lot of stories that have gone untold and unwritten, a lot of times have been passed down orally through generations. And so through the work that I've done with Professor Martinez and trying to reclaim these lost stories of state violence against Mexicans in Texas, there have been stories of family members passing down to their children stories of violence in which their, uncle or like father were murdered by the Texas Rangers or other, like the U.S. Army or other state actors. And at the same time, it's like these stories that are passed on orally, like sort of unofficially in this way, it's for the stories to survive, but at the same time, the stories that are being written and put in textbooks to be, written to maintain control, by certain actors maintaining the status quo, etc. And I think that sort of transitions into our next question.
So for context, what kind of inspired me to start thinking about the work that I did with Magda was a textbook. McGraw-Hill released a textbook in 2015 that referred to slaves as immigrant workers. And so what does it mean to describe this violent, traumatic past in a way that gives agency to the slaves? They were immigrant workers and they moved here. And that's just a complete disregard for what actually happened. And so I want to read you a quote from another textbook published in Texas. And the quote reads, "Some slaves reported that their masters treated them kindly. To protect their investment, some slaveholders provided adequate food and clothing for their slaves. However, severe treatment was very common. Whippings, brandings, and even worse, torture were all part of American slavery. And so just thinking about the language that is used here, in the second half of this quote, there is no subject. We have passivized what had happened. We passivized the whippings and the torture, and we don't put anyone to blame there. But we referred to the slaves as the actors in the first two sentences, and I think that to me is very important, because not only are we just telling these stories, we're specifically using the language to mask how dark and traumatic this history is. And I think that moving forward, thinking about something that could change, even as we're talking about these histories, is thinking about if we change the word from slave owners to enslavers, and what does that evoke in a reader, and who does that place the blame on? And so as we continue talking about who stories are told, it's important to think about when stories aren't told by the people that these things happen to, when they're told by the oppressors, when they're told by the people in power, what language are they using, and what does that do to students who are reading these textbooks? And that's really where we want to continue this conversation about. So what do you think? We're going to do another turn and talk. What stories are told? Who gets to tell their stories? Take about 2 minutes and we'll come back whole group so we can hear your thoughts. Thanks for coming.
Sorry, we're very late. Very slow. We made it through. Yeah.
We get to read the commentaries of
I know. That's a crazy quote. Was that a textbook?
What was the journal? Are we Jonathan Burton's?
This is from an article in 2015. I know, but you know so much about country life.
It's not English, but definitely colored by like what he
Yeah,
published.
I know his racist.
So I think that like the
Oh yeah, this is my what's next. This is my how do we
I think it's very important in my analysis.
And storytellers that they keep going. You know what I mean? I feel like we all just because I don't want to like.
It's also partly about like.
It's like a
Yeah.
just oh yeah, I think that if I could talk about
It's like we're that's that animation, but I'm sure it's other.
We can go small scope, large universe. I think that's totally fine. The two of you are
It's just
smaller
like
scope,
there's
and that's important because that's still affecting the lives of others. It's so deep, but we can think more like education.
Yeah.
Where the stories are happening, so for example,
Who wrote in a language that was accessible.
versus like a family dinner where a grandparent is telling something and like the context of where that story's taking place.
All right.
Changes the power dynamic.
So I want to hear what you all think. What did you discuss in your small groups? Anybody?
Oh, sure. Okay. I'm a classics concentrator, and so we read a lot of commentaries. And it's interesting to see whose commentaries we get to read and what those commentaries bring to the actual original text. Sometimes we will read like a Western commentator, and it's a very qualitatively different thing than reading a commentator who existed in the tradition. And I feel it's like we in America get to read like the more accessible commentary is the one in English. It's the one that's written down in a script that we understand. So I think it's, yeah, the things that are made more accessible either forcibly or by chance are the things that we get to consume.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
I guess for me, especially like with your example of the textbook, really brought a lot of ideas about like the intersection between education and capitalism and how that really dictates what's being said. And also specifically with your example of like even small things like writing styles and changing things from like active voice to passive voice, or vice versa, totally can like be used as a form of victim blaming almost. So that like in your example, like slaves almost seemed like they were seeking for like a master and the masters were nice. but like sometimes they were mean, or like not even like just like sometimes bad things happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that's like really important in sort of thinking like who gets to tell the stories. We were just discussing how, in like both examples she was giving, it's like happening in Texas books, and it's because of the buying power that Texas has in being a very large state, and so if it decides to buy a certain textbook because it's such a large amount, that's sort of what other states end up doing because, like you said, capitalism. But something I was mentioning to her is that if you look at the composition of the Texas Board of Education, it's it's very political. It's not everyone on this. I think it's like a 15 to 20 member board has much education history. I mean, there's like a few of them who have a history of working in schools or being educators, but for the most part, a lot of them, I think I remember at one point the chair of the board was a dentist or something. It's very much just a political position that you run for. You work, the politics, and you get elected. So who is making these decisions in the office to be like, we're going to teach our children these stories and pick this textbook that calls slaves workers, and it's very much, it's making very important decisions in that you're teaching, a couple million school-age students these histories. So going into our next question, it's very much about, what responsibility do we take on when telling others stories? Too often we may end up telling a story that isn't our own necessarily, whether it's a narrative and telling a story in like Story Slam, whether it's writing a history of a certain population or an individual. And I think it's really important to take into consideration your own positionality. I think this was something you were mentioning, can any story ever be truly unbiased? And I think that it can't be. A lot of times when we talk about histories particularly, there sort of might be a dominant narrative and it might be seen as like the truth. But I think I've been very thankful in that a few of the professors I've had here have made it very clear that any history is biased, even if you're grabbing a certain amount of documents or even using data. I feel like even science is biased, as we can see from like the history of like eugenics, scientific racism, and it's really much where you're coming from, how you've been raised, what set of beliefs you have, and even under what circumstances maybe you're analyzing these documents or telling stories. It very much influences the way in which you tell it, how you interpret it. And so to take a lot of these histories as fact or like that it happened exactly this way is very dangerous, and it allows for certain bad things to happen, which I feel like contributes to events such as Trump currently. But yeah, it's like really important that we all are aware of our positionality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to add to that, I also think just thinking about who gets to claim what knowledge is, and like the demographics of who holds the PhDs in what field, and who gets to write the textbooks, and what's their positionality, and if a field is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly like socioeconomically privileged, then obviously that's going to affect that. Theater, as I was talking about before, is, it's all about telling someone else's story, so that responsibility is inherent. And I think it's complicated no matter what way you cut it, but it becomes especially complicated if the character whose story you're telling lacks privileges that you hold. And I just want to give an anecdote. In 13, the show, the character who's kind of the comic relief in the show has muscular dystrophy and uses forearm crutches to walk and is physically disabled. So there's the physical disability, but he's also the funny one. And so trying to create this kind of holistic character in a way where he wasn't funny because he didn't have fully functioning legs. He wasn't funny because he had crutches and like struggled to get up onto like platforms on the stage. And I was very fortunate to have the boy who's playing this role was really, really invested in doing a good job with this, and he like did his research. He took it very seriously. And we had a lot of conversations one-on-one about that and how can, he be the funny guy while also navigating this like form of oppression that this character has to live with. And some of the other conversations we had to have was with the cast, though, because this boy who's playing this role is physically able, athletic, I think he was 14 at the time, 14 or 15-year-old boy. And so he's trying really hard to like be in it fully. But sometimes if he were, you know, trying to get up onto a platform and he stumbles and the other cast members laugh, and they're laughing because like Coley, this kid, is struggling to get onto the platform, like, no, that's something that we need to step back and say, okay, why do you find this funny? What's funny about someone not being able to navigate the physical world around them because it wasn't built for them? And like, there's not anything funny about that. And so just being able to step back as a group and, you know, examine our laughter, examine what counts as comedy and what should be taken seriously. And that was something that I tried really hard to work with the cast on. And I think by the end of it, like, everyone had a really grounded view in what we were doing and why we were doing it. And so I was appreciative of that group who were able to kind of step up to that conversation.
Yeah, I can start. I mean, I think that, yeah, once these voices are silenced, very, like I was mentioning earlier, there's sort of very detrimental effects. So at least in the scope of my own work and the research I've done, and being from Texas, I think one of the examples I think of is sort of like the Alamo. So, you know, I think the Alamo is a very, very big thing in Texas history. Everyone knows it. It's very underwhelming when you go see it because it's really small. But, you know, remember the Alamo is a very important part of like the Texas historical narrative. And given that it occurred during the Mexican-American War, it sort of pits Mexico versus Texas, Mexicans and Texans. And so because of it, the way this story is told, you know, it often, almost always gets overlooked that there was several, I think around 7 individuals of Mexican descent who were fighting within the Alamo against Mexico. You know, they identified themselves as Tejanos, so Texas Mexicans, and very much saw Texas as their place where their loyalties lied. But because they've been, you know, left out of this narrative of the Alamo, it very much fuels these antagonistic feelings against Mexicans, and because of their erasure from this important part of history, you know, people forget that Mexicans have always lived in Texas and that Texas used to be a part of Mexico. And so even though, you know, Texas is a majority minority state, a large portion of its Hispanic population is Mexican. They've been living there for generations, particularly in South Texas. You have a lot of people whose family has lived there and holds land grants from, you know, the Spanish government, and whose sort of narrative is, you know, the border crossed us, we didn't cross the border. But because the way the history is told, it overlooks these important actors in its history. Mexicans, despite being, you know, a very integral part to Texas history, are still treated as foreigners within a land that they probably have lived in for a longer time than Anglo settlers who moved in from the north. So, you know, the way we tell our histories and who we choose to highlight is very important, and it has very important effects. But I mean, at the same time, I think that no matter how you want to tell a history, there's something that's always going to be sort of forgotten. So a very big, important academic from Haiti named Michel Rolfe-Trouillot, probably butchered that. One of his most famous quotes is, any historical narrative is a bundle of silences. And so what he sort of means by that is that, you know, inherently you're always going to forget something, someone's going to get overlooked, and trying to highlight a specific group of people or a certain narrative, you're going to inherently sort of silence a different one. But I think what's really important is that acknowledgement of that. I think that as long as in telling your story you acknowledge, you know, that you're not representing everyone's views, or that, you know, because of, you know, the difficulty in obtaining certain documents or reading certain languages, you can't provide a voice to a certain group of the society. I think that that is imperative in making sure that that these voices aren't completely silenced, you know, that you acknowledge that they're missing, but that they exist.
Yeah, so just to add to what I think happens when voices are silenced, so what was awesome about designing this class is I don't think I have all the answers, and I think that that was the point of this class, is to get people together who are interested in this topic and try and brainstorm and think about what is happening and how can we change it. And so from my work, this is kind of what I've decided is happening, and you all can feel free to disagree with me, but so in Northern Ireland, for example, the Troubles happened pretty recently. It was in like the 60s, and it was a lot of just political turmoil between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland, and so many people died, and it was a very traumatic event in history. But in Northern Ireland, you're not required to study the Troubles in order to graduate. It is not a required component of your history curriculum, and it can be chosen to do it as an elective, which I think means that when we're not putting these issues in our main history curricula, we're assigning capital to certain knowledge and narratives and norms. And then when you compound that with testing in the United States, where student promotion, teacher evaluation, funding to schools is based on how students are doing on these tests, it means that we're just pushing the information that's not going to be on the test to the side and prioritizing this often uninformed history. I think the second thing that this does is it contributes to a lack of understanding of how these structural racism is continuing today. Without understanding how it happened and how it continued throughout history, it's so hard for us to understand what's going on today. So like Jonathan was saying about Donald Trump, like the water crisis in Flint, that's environmental racism. It's stemmed in all of our country's thoughts about this, and without our students understanding that they need to think critically about all of this over history, I think we're going to continue to have students who don't understand what's going on. And I think the last thing that I've gauged from this is on an individual level, I think it makes it really hard to be a student, to be in a classroom and to have none of your narratives voiced. I think it makes it really hard to be engaged, and I think it really makes it hard to be human. And when you're not human and when you're not engaged, you're not learning. And I think we're just not creating safe spaces for our students, which is not okay. And that's my 2 cents on that. So what next?
On a very small and Brown specific scale, I think for storytellers, it's a huge pride and a huge regret that the what's next question is super left open for that club. The platform has been created. We've made this club a really, really popular performance group. But I don't know if we did it responsibly, and I take ownership of that. And I think that moving forward, future leaders will really have to concertedly think about growth and think about audience, and especially think about the stories that we're telling. So what's next for Brown Storytellers is a lot of really difficult conversations, and hopefully change.
What's next for Funny Face Productions? Just as an organization, we're having another production this summer, but beyond that, the future is kind of murky because I will no longer be coming home every summer because I'm graduating and trying to be a functional adult. I think in terms of everything we talked about today, something that I would like to try to do more of this summer is having difficult conversations with the cast. And this show we're doing this summer isn't particularly tough in those ways, but I do think that having this group and practicing together 5 times a week, doing activities on the weekends, going to the park, there are so many opportunities for conversations like this to come up. Also conversations about what theater, how to do theater responsibly. So I think some of the kids in the past really wanted me to do Rent, and just being able to talk to them about why having a cast of entirely white cisgender people, we can't really do Rent responsibly that way, because that's not what the story's about. The story is about race. The story is about there's a transgender character who is plays a major role in it, and their gender identity is a huge part of this. And just talking about how we can responsibly tell stories and what stories are ours to tell. On a broader kind of zoomed out scale in the world of theater, theater as an industry is overwhelmingly white. 95% of Tony nominees have been white in the history of the award. It's largely been reserved for privileged people. Tickets are very expensive. You can spend $3,000 on a ticket to Hamilton, and what's ironic about that is Hamilton is a show that has a cast that's made up mostly of people of color. And so how access to the theater is changing is going to be interesting. Right now, there are several shows on Broadway, including Hamilton, that do have casts that are either entirely made up of people of color or are just more racially diverse than other shows have been in the past. And it'll be interesting to see if that was a coincidence, that these shows just like happened to be produced in the same season around the same time, or if we're seeing an institutional change happening and seeing this industry become more accessible. And I hope it's the latter. And I hope that, you know, that's in the professional world of theater, but I hope community theater also continues to become more accessible and, you know, built for everyone and by everyone.
Yeah, and sort of within, I guess, the scope of my own work and on, I guess, the academic side, I think as I go into graduate school and as a graduate student, I hope to continue to engage with the community and work on public humanities projects. And I think it's really important for academics to do that. I know that at Brown, there's several professors in the American Studies department that have been working with Providence schools. I know one charter school, I think in particular, in developing ethnic studies within the city of Providence. I know that there's been a very big initiative amongst the students themselves pushing for that to be included in the curriculum. And so I think that I hope to continue to be involved in that. But I think that there's still also a lot that needs to be done sort of on the political policy side, which I, unfortunately, I guess, given the route I'm pursuing, don't have as much influence in, but hope to work with and serve as an ally to whoever is pushing for those changes. Yeah.
Awesome. And so for me, most of you are seniors, so you won't be able to take this class, but I hope that students take this class, and I hope these conversations continue for just a larger picture, thinking about the future of education here in America. It's just a small question, you know. What I think we need to create classrooms where we have critical thinkers. So as we discussed, no history, no story is ever going to be without bias. But I think having students who understand point of view, who understand bias, will become critical consumers of everything that's put in front of them. And so they won't necessarily just accept things as they are presented and be able to make up their own minds and their opinions and understand, I think, a little bit more honestly what happened in history. I think that we also just have a desperate need for more policy to be enacted by people who have worked with our students and who have backgrounds in working with our students in order to better inform this policy and this practice. And I think I think it's really important that as people continue to enter the teaching field, particularly people who are not from marginalized backgrounds, need to understand that they have more work to do when they go into communities that they're not from. And so understanding how to learn from not only teachers who are from the background of your students, but like the community members, because there is such a wealth of knowledge existing in that community that you need to be able to take advantage of that and not come in assuming that you know how to teach these students and how to teach them about their history. And that is what we have to say. We just want to open up the floor if anyone has any ideas about what next. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what this means in terms of what's next. Just something that felt really exciting to me about this discussion is like the possibility it opens for intergenerational communication that's coming from a place of love. And I think that like in school settings, that like question of love is oftentimes lost, and I mean, there are all sorts of reasons for that. But in what you were talking about in terms of like oral history projects, or even just like creating a space for people to share stories and to collectively share stories, and like through theater, of course, like the interactions you're having with your students, but also like the people who are coming. Like, what does it mean for an adult to come and hear a story told by kids? And like, I don't know, all of those intergenerational exchanges seem really important to me, and like having venues where that's based in love is like just critical, it seems.
Okay, thank you.
Anne, is that a hand?
I guess just what's next is just knowing, like, I know as Brown students, like, we always want to try to be everything we can, and like if we don't think we have like the experience, like we might feel like a little like, oh, like I don't want to step in, but just knowing your own experience and being able to use that to either like help a conversation or like help someone else have a conversation. So just knowing where your place can be and knowing that it's okay to like step aside, or even it's okay to not know something, but like know where to get that knowledge. I think that's like, especially coming from a humanities background, which a lot of people are like, well, what do you like do with that? It's just like knowing how to use knowledge and knowing how to seek knowledge is just like important, and taking those skills and using them not in a classroom setting, but like
everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Anybody else? If not, this is the end of our roundtable. We will be here to answer questions, but thank you so much for your participation.